The Version of Me I Had to Grow Into by Emma Sheth. For a long time, I believed resilience meant being able to carry everything without flinching. It meant functioning well under pressure, anticipating problems before they formed, and absorbing responsibility without complaint. If something looked uncertain, I prepared for it. If something felt exposed, I reinforced it. I took pride in spotting issues early and fixing them quietly. If I could see something coming, I could manage it. And if I could manage it, nothing would unravel. That mindset served me well in the early stages of building our businesses. Everything was immediate and hands-on. We didn't have solid structured or layered management. We had kitchen bench strategy sessions after the kids were asleep, supplier calls wedged between daycare drop-offs, and long conversations about pricing, positioning, and payroll, with spreadsheets open on laptops at all hours of the night. It felt ambitious and alive. Yes, there was unpredictability, but it was energizing. When something broke, we fixed it. When growth required stretch, we stretched. I liked being the steady one inside that motion. When numbers tightened, I recalculated. When a team member hesitated, I clarified direction. Responsibility felt like proof of competence. Speed felt like strength. I genuinely believed that was resilience. What I didn't realize at the time was how closely my identity was attaching itself to being indispensable. Long before entrepreneurship, I stepped into a corporate leadership role that I wasn't entirely welcomed into. The culture was structured and controlled. Leadership looked firm and directive. Performance was monitored closely. Meetings felt guarded and efficient. From my first day, I sensed the tension of walking into a room where I was expected to lead in a style that didn't feel entirely natural to me. I had inherited a team that was used to instruction more than dialogue. My instinct was different. I wanted to mentor rather than micromanage. I wanted people to understand context rather than simply follow process. I believed that trust created stronger, more sustainable performance than pressure. I remember sitting in my car after my first day, gripping the steering wheel and replaying every conversation. Had I been too open? Not assertive enough? Was I being too collaborative? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had open-seeked and searched for other roles. Not because I lacked ability, but because I felt exposed. I questioned whether I belonged in that room at all. That night, I lay awake, mapping practical exit strategies. It felt responsible to consider the alternatives. But underneath the practicality was fear. Fear of being misread. Fear of not fitting the mold. Fear that my leadership style might not survive under scrutiny. But I went back the next day. Not to prove anyone wrong. Not to perform confidence. I simply committed to leading in a way that felt aligned. I asked questions. I explained decisions. I trusted people with ownership. I held standards calmly rather than tightly. It didn't shift overnight. There were awkward moments where I second-guessed myself mid-meeting. But gradually something shifted. Initiative increased. Conversations opened. Performance strengthened. A senior manager eventually told me, "You can go places with leadership like this." That sentence anchored itself somewhere deep in me. Strength did not require tightness. Years later, when we built our own businesses, I carried that belief forward. I believed resilience meant holding steady while developing others, and that leadership was about building capability, not controlling every variable. I believed that if you created the right environment, people would rise inside it. But scale has a way of quietly reshaping posture. As our business expanded, more locations, more staff, larger payroll, greater exposure, leadership stopped feeling scrappy and began feeling weighty. Payroll wasn't theoretical. It represented households. Expansion wasn't just exciting, it was consequential. Decisions carried ripple effects that extended beyond ambition. I didn't immediately register that I was carrying more than operational responsibility. On the surface, I still appeared calm. I made decisions efficiently, I held conversations clearly, and nothing outwardly looked strained. But in hindsight, I can see the accumulation. My mind didn't fully switch off at night. It moved through contingencies. If something shifted unexpectedly, would I see it early enough? If a key team member resigned unexpectedly, who would step in? If an expansion underperformed, what narrative would that create? It wasn't panic, it was preparedness. Constant preparedness. I didn't call it anxiety, I still called it leadership. Beneath that preparedness was something I didn't articulate at the time. If this fails, will it reflect on me differently? Not in other people's eyes, in my own. No one said it directly, but I carried a quiet pressure, not just to succeed, but to justify success. Prove growth was measured and ambition responsible. Looking back, I don't think anyone was asking me to carry it that way, but I was. Because I didn't recognize it as weight, I never put it down. It became background noise, a steady hum of vigilance that over time felt normal, mature, necessary. This tightening showed up in conversations where my husband would walk through new ideas. Often before he finished, I was already assembling a rebuttal. Not because I hated the idea, but because I trained myself to scan for risk faster than possibility. I had to teach myself to pause long enough to genuinely hear the idea before I defended against it. It wasn't conflict. It was emotional. It was reflex. As our responsibilities grew, my mind moved towards safeguarding them. I told myself I was being strategic, and in many ways I was. But gradually I realized I wasn't analyzing ideas. I was bracing for impact. The more we grew, the more I felt the need to be certain before moving. Certainty feels intelligent. It feels safe. But when certainty becomes a requirement before action, it quietly shifts from caution into control. That posture was tested in a hotel room one day. We'd been discussing the possibility of opening another business, and on paper the opportunity aligned strategically. There was logic to it. There was upside. But the moment it moved from theoretical to tangible, something inside me stiffened. My husband was ready to go all in. It was a hard no from me. Not hesitant, not unsure, just no. I wanted data, market research, forecasts, risk modeling. I wanted numbers that I could stand on. Something I could defend if it didn't work. Something I could point to and say, this is why we did this. What are the numbers? I asked. He didn't have what I wanted. He had belief. It'll work, he said. Which to me at the time felt wildly insufficient. Belief doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. You can't graft instinct. You can't present gut feel in a boardroom. And I remember feeling frustrated that he couldn't offer the certainty I needed to feel comfortable. Because comfort, I realized later, was what I was protecting. Not the business, myself. Opening something new meant exposure, stepping into expansion without guarantee. It meant being wrong publicly. I had spent years learning how to be prepared, how to defend decisions with logic, how to lead with measured confidence. This asked me to move without the armor fully in place. Eventually, we agreed to submit an offer significantly under the asking price, low enough that I felt sure we didn't have to go ahead. In my mind, it was a controlled stretch, a way to say yes without saying yes fully. The probability of acceptance felt small enough that my risk exposure remained manageable. He has always been more comfortable moving before every answer is visible. I move more confidently when I can see structure. Where I lean towards safeguarding, he leans towards possibility. He has never dismissed my caution, but he's also never allowed it to become our ceiling. At 7 a.m. the next morning, his phone lit up. The offer had been accepted. There was no drama, just a quiet shift in the room. We were in. My first instinct was not celebration. It was planning. We needed structure, forecast, clear next steps, but beneath that practicality sat something humbling. I had braced for impact. I'd mentally prepared for the I told you so moment. It never came. Instead, we built and we learned in motion. And as the businesses began to stabilize and then grow, I had to confront something uncomfortable. My hesitation had not been clarity. It had been control. Admitting that didn't diminish my strength. It clarified it. What I didn't say out loud in that season was how stretching that muscle inside a marriage feels different than stretching it in business. In business, disagreement can stay strategic. In marriage, it is layered with history, personality, love, and ego. It meant learning to sit beside someone who sees possibility where I see risk and not assume one of us is wiser. It meant recognizing that my instinct to safeguard is valuable, but not always decisive. There were moments where pausing felt uncomfortable, where letting an idea breathe instead of dissecting it felt unnatural. I had to admit that my resistance wasn't purely strategic, it was protective. And to his credit, he didn't bulldoze that. He didn't dismiss my caution as negativity. He listened, he let me process, he held conviction without making me small for needing more structure. Standing in the middle of that expansion, I realized I was growing in ways numbers could never show. I didn't understand how much that mattered until a few years later when we left the business behind for a short holiday. This time, it wasn't a manager stepping in. It was someone on the floor. Someone I had quietly seen potential in for a long time. She didn't carry formal authority, but I'd noticed the way she handled pressure, the way she anticipated small issues, and the way others naturally responded to her when the environment became busy. Before we left, I made a deliberate decision to give her real space. Not just half, but responsibility that would normally default back to me. I prepared notes. I outlined scenarios. I convinced myself that responsible leadership meant eliminating friction before it could arise. On that first day away, I checked my phone more often than necessary. Not because anything had failed, but because I expected responsibilities to bounce back. It didn't. She handled it. Team moved. Customers were served. Small problems were resolved, and the department ran. And what struck me most was not that everything went smoothly, it was that she grew into the space I did not occupy. Belief in potential requires restraint. You cannot say that you see leadership in someone and then crowd the environment where it would emerge. What surprised me most, though, was not her capability, it was the absence of panic in me. I didn't feel the familiar urge to hover. I wasn't scanning for gaps. I wasn't rehearsing contingency plans in my head. Years earlier, that space would have felt risky, letting go of threads I believed only I could hold. But this time, watching her step forward without friction, I felt something steadier. I saw that same steadiness reflected again in someone who has become the heart of one of our spaces. She didn't grow into the role with fanfare or promotion language. She grew into it the way people grow into belonging, gradually, confidently, and without needing to be told twice. From early on, I had noticed something about her, the way she handled pressure without becoming sharp, the way customers responded to her before she even realized they were, the way newer team members instinctively mirrored her rhythm. She didn't manage loudly, she anchored quietly. When the space expanded around her, she didn't flinch. She carried it like it had always been hers. Watching that unfold did something unexpected in me. Pride, of course, but also relief. Not the relief of stepping away, the relief of realizing I no longer believed I had to be the center of everything for it to hold. There's something deeply moving about watching someone rise in an environment you once felt responsible for stabilizing. It's deeper than delegation. It's evidence that what you built can breathe without you hovering. She is the heart of that place now, not because I handed it to her, but because I finally stepped back enough for it to surface. And that shift, both hers and mine, is one of the quietest indicators that I am no longer bracing. Standing there, I wasn't just witnessing their growth, I was witnessing my own. Even now, when new opportunities surface, I feel the familiar pull towards certainty. The difference is that I notice it. That pause, that awareness is where growth lives. Resilience doesn't look the way I thought it once did. Now it sometimes looks like releasing hypervigilance as identity, separating preparation from fear and allowing myself to be wrong without shrinking, leading from steadiness rather than defense. Because when I changed internally, everything around me shifted. I did not become fearless. Even as I grew into steadiness, there were layers I hadn't fully confronted. In that earlier corporate season, lowering my voice had felt subtle and practical. It seemed like maturity. It seemed like adaptation. But when I look back honestly, I can see how much energy it took to continually calibrate myself. I monitored tone, I softened certainty. I prepared arguments before anyone raised objections. I overbuilt presentations so that nothing could be questioned. And I believed that if I was twice as prepared, I would be twice as credible. That habit followed me into business. What I was actually doing was protecting myself from the possibility of being wrong. I didn't see it then. I saw diligence. I saw intelligence. I saw responsible leadership. That protection showed up in small ways. I framed ambition as practicality. When opportunities came, I spoke about them lightly. When awards followed growth, I mentioned them almost in passing. Oh, it's just became the opening of sentences that should have stood confidently on their own. I softened success before it had the chance to sound large. It wasn't false humility, it was conditioning. Amid the daycare drop-offs and bedtime stories, I internalized the thought that ambition coming from a mother needed explanation. That stretch required justification. That visibility needed to be tempered so that it remained palatable. No one handed me that script directly, but I just carried it anyway. It showed up at night in quieter ways. There were evenings when I read a bedtime story while half my mind ran through a decision from earlier that day. Work humming in the background. I put my phone beside the bed just in case, though nothing urgent was expected. The children didn't see panic, they saw presence. I understand the difference now. Vigilance kept me alert. Steadiness allowed me to exhale. Steadiness feels different. It leans back. It allows a sentence to finish without interruption. It allows for silence and imperfection without equating it to failure. When I shifted internally, the ripple was immediate. My daughters heard me speak about achievements without softening it. My team felt leadership that was steadier, not tighter. My husband was given space to finish an idea before I began solving it. I sometimes think about the woman sitting in her car years ago, scrolling job listings, because she believed she did not belong in that corporate room. What she didn't understand then was not that she was too soft. She was simply early. Years later, in that hotel room at 7 a.m., absorbing a decision that stretched my comfort, I was no longer searching for an exit. I was steady. The fear that once whispered I did not belong had softened into quiet confidence. I no longer confuse control with competence or equate hesitation with intelligence. The woman who once searched for safety now builds spaces where others feel safe enough to grow. That is the version of me I had to grow into.